Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of The Other Side of the Struggle. Oh my gosh, you guys, I am super excited to have yet another fantastic guest speaker. She's new to the podcast, Lara Johnson. She is a mom of four kids. She's been running a coaching business that's doing really great for the last 4 years. She loves coaching moms that feel like there's more to momhood, to get clear on their purpose, and to be the mom they dream of being. And she's also the host of the Mom on Purpose podcast. So definitely go check that out after you guys listen to this one. Laura and I connected, gosh, probably about a year ago, I would say, and we've been friends ever since. Because we've been talking about like some of the traumas and things that we have seen and experienced ourselves. And I just thought that she was such a great person to come onto the podcast today and talk to you guys about living on purpose, because I know that that is something that a lot of my audience wants to hear. Um, how to ask for the things that we need to heal, how to get to the place where we're going. And I just couldn't think of anybody better than Laura today to talk about this journey of going from a place like a dark place to just full on creation and feeling like you've got this safety, you've got this security, and you've got this in a lack of a better way to say that. So Laura, thanks so much for hanging out with us today.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I am too. Very
Yeah.
excited.
Yes.
So Laura, let's let the listeners kind of just get a little bit acquainted with you. Talk a little bit about like some of the things that you have experienced, in trauma, because I mean, there's many different ways to experience trauma. My niche especially, they deal with husbands who are into porn or into um pornography, or well, I just said that, oh my heavens, but like
I got you,
porn.
girl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mom on purpose, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
we're here, we're here.
right.
But like or like prostitution, or some sort of betrayal at the hands of their husbands. But as I've been talking to my own clients, I mean, like you were saying, I mean, there's postpartum depression trauma. There's trauma from, growing up. I had a lot of that myself. And there's trauma literally around us. It's not something that really ever truly goes away. I just experienced a trauma last week, And before, you know, before I started learning like these principles and like my pillars, it would have like totally like knocked the wind out of me, and uh would have made me get into this really, really dark place. But now, I process it and I'm back in the driver's seat within a day or two. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So talk to me about your process here. Like, I know you've mentioned to me about some of the things that you have experienced.
Yeah. I I heard a quote the other day that talked about trauma in a really unique way that I had never heard before. And I'll start with this. And it said something like trauma is less about the circumstance and more about how our brain processes an event. So I really liked that in the event. On like, sometimes when we're talking like, oh, that person has more like a harder quote unquote traumatic experience than I have, or like it's really easy, I think, for some of us to like compare, like that person has it way worse than I do, so I shouldn't be as sad about this. And I think for me that was kind of my first introduction to trauma. And I really wish in a way that we could all feel so safe and secure with each other that we could walk around with like what my trauma was like on a sign in front of me. So like we all like we instantly have like a connection to each other. The world isn't safe in that way, vulnerability wise, and so we can't do that. But that's where I kind of wanted to start on like sharing my experience with trauma in the beginning was when I was a child, 8 years old. I was molested by an uncle who was a very trusted family member. He had been married to my dad's sister for over 20 years. He was in our same religion. He was a very Christian man. He had his own children. And it was very shocking to me. As you talk about like the betrayal trauma, I mean, it was a trusted member of our family, and I felt very betrayed by it. And at the same time, later on, it came out that there was many family members, cousins, siblings, things like that. He eventually went to jail for it. Without going into too many details, what I found was that I didn't give myself enough credit for the trauma that I experienced because other people had it worse than me. And other cousins were abused more often than I was. And I just had the one time. And it wasn't as bad as some of my family members. And so it was like I was always discrediting the trauma instead of like understanding what really was happening inside of my brain. So, fast forward, I find that was the kind of the common thread through all of my experience with trauma was that other people had it worse than me, and therefore I couldn't feel as bad about it as I did. And so when I really got to the point of asking for help, which is what we're going to talk about today, I finally validated myself that no, actually, this is really hard for me.
Yeah.
And when I finally gave myself permission to own that it was hard for me, and I didn't have to think about everyone else's trials and discredit my own experience, that was when, for the first time, I finally had the courage to ask for help.
Wow. And there's a piece in this, Laura, that you mentioned, like, and that I hear a lot from my audience, like it's not as bad as somebody
Yeah,
else. It's not as bad as somebody else. It's not as bad as somebody else. And like I mean, I think that we all kind of have that story too. Like
yeah,
I've dealt with physical abuse, mental abuse, spiritual abuse, social abuse, like all the kinds of different abuse. But I had an encounter once by a stranger actually where it was kind of sexually abusing. Um, and even today, like I'm like people ask me like what kind of abuse, and like sexual abuse isn't even something that is in my radar, but yes, it actually did happen at least once, as I can think about it. But I hear this piece so much of I can't acknowledge, like it's not as bad as somebody else, it's not as
yeah,
bad as somebody else, it's not as bad as somebody else. And even though it might be true, and you can see that somebody else might be having it worse, because yes, there's things happening that are way worse than anything that we have dealt with, and I think it's good to be aware of that. But I think we have to be so careful of this piece of it's not as bad, because then it turns into a self betrayal, you know what I mean?
completely, 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think for me, and that's where, that definition I started out with is trauma is less about what happens, like the actual circumstance, and more about how your brain is processing an event. And when I really understood that, like my brain processed very specific things as trauma. And it was okay for me to say that out loud, knowing that it quote unquote wasn't as bad as other people. And I have a podcast episode about this where I talk about like looking on the bright side, or it's not as bad as others, is just a way, I call it negative gratitude, where we think we should be more grateful, but it's kind of a messed up way to like, we should be more grateful our trauma wasn't so bad instead of like, no, actually, this sucks and this is hard and this hurts really bad. And the self-betrayal, I think, is something that we don't talk enough about. It's like everybody else has betrayed us, and now we're going to not even have our own back, and we're going to betray our own selves. Like that can be really, really hard to get past. And I will say that when we're stuck in the negative gratitude, it never actually produces more gratitude. It
No.
only makes us feel bad about ourselves.
Yes. Yes. Oh, that's so true. And I think that's part of like societal conditioning a little bit, you know what I
Yes.
mean?
Yeah.
Where, because it's like, oh, quit your crying, it's not that
Mhm.
bad. Or knock it off, it's not that bad. And I personally have been even guilty of saying that to my own kids, but
Mhm.
one thing I have personally noticed that the less I betray my own emotions, because that's kind of what
Mhm.
self-betrayal is
Yes.
betraying your own
Hmm.
emotions, right?
Yeah.
The less I betray my own emotions, and the more I'm doing kind of like with what you're saying and acknowledging it that this sucks. This is
Hmm.
not fun. Like, I'm not pushing it away. I'm not trying to get away
Yeah.
from it. I'm not trying to discredit it. I'm not trying to say that this is not the case,
Hmm.
right? The more I'm actually able to be present for my kids, and
Yeah.
that's like really where I want to be. Um, and the thing is like I get like this negative gratitude piece that you're talking about here too, because gratitude is a big part of it. And I talk about like, actually learning how to be grateful for
Yeah.
the things that happen, and even the trauma, because had I not experienced what I experienced, I wouldn't be talking about it today.
Right.
And I wouldn't be able to stand up and share my message. But there's that piece of, like you said, kind of having your own back and giving yourself the time to process what's really happening.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think a lot of times, Christian culture, culture around women, there's like anger is not of God. Don't hold grudges, forgive and forget, all of these things. So then when we have big emotions show up, like the angry emotions, the hurt emotions, we think we need to get out of it fast. And we're almost like afraid if we feel it, we won't ever get out of it. But what I found, at least in my experience, was with my own trauma, the more I tried to push it away, the more it stuck to me. It
Mm-hmm.
was like the more I told myself I was wrong for feeling it and I should be more grateful that it wasn't as bad as other people, it was like it consumed me.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of like giving myself permission on just feeling it and actually going all the way into it, that was the first time I received help from myself, where I finally gave myself permission that I was valuable enough to just be with me. And it wasn't, and I love what you said on like being able to show up better for our kids. Yes, that's such an important part for me. But I also had to start valuing myself enough that I was valuable enough to show up for me.
Yeah.
And I think that that was the first time, like, I really was open to receiving help because I finally valued myself.
Yeah. Totally. And like, what a cool thing. And like, I like seeing what you've built today, and like just how very beautiful and put together and everything you are, and like how very organized you're feeling, and like you bring across just this beautiful energy. And I feel like for me, kind of talking about like, the trauma versus like where we were at to where we're at now. I know for a fact for me, acknowledging that, hey, I'm important enough to feel this. I'm important enough to have my own back.
Yeah.
I'm important enough to love myself, including all of my experiences. Like that's part of loving yourself.
Yeah.
Because if you think about like love, and you love your kids, right? And this is something that, my listeners can connect to, because, they're moms. But like when your kids are in a poopy diaper, you still love them,
Mhm.
you know? Eventually that poopy diaper needs to be removed.
Mhm.
I get that. Um, but we don't get rid of the poopy by trying to say, oh, that diaper's not as bad as as
Yeah.
my neighbor's poopy child.
Hmm.
Like it doesn't
Totally.
happen that way. It doesn't happen that way. But we still love the baby. We still love that
Hmm.
child, even though they're poopy, even though they're a little
Yeah.
bit stinky.
Yeah.
Okay, even though they've got a little bit of stuff on their face,
Mm.
they just made a giant mess in your kitchen. You still love that baby,
Yeah.
right? To love ourselves is to completely accept every piece of us, including our experiences. And when we do that and we start actually, and this is the coolest thing, Laura, like things that I've actually seen in me and my clients and in you, when we finally acknowledge that, what happens is like it's almost like the cogs start to shift in our favor. We actually start to make that change. When we say things like, I want to be in a relationship that uh, where he really appreciates me. Well, if you're giving yourself the things that you're desiring from someone else, it's like it starts to actually draw respect and appreciation back
Right.
to you because now you're giving that to yourself. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I love all of that. The way I think about it is the way we love ourselves is kind of like the box or the fortress that we put ourselves in. And if we don't have that self love there, it's like that fortress is up and our love can't get out, but we also can't receive love in. And so in order for us to like really break down that fortress, we have to like lower our walls and be vulnerable and really allow ourselves to connect first with ourselves, and then other people's love can start to come in. Otherwise it just bounces right off. And we know that we do that with like somebody gives you a compliment, for example, and you're like, "Oh, I got this shirt on sale." You're like, instead of just
You brush
saying
it
thank
off.
you. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mhm.
Like that all in my mind, and when I'm coaching my clients, that's to me, that's a sign of there's a little bit of like self love that could be improved there.
Mhm.
Same thing. And like you gave a really amazing presentation, or you're a really great mom. You're like, well, I got really great kids. Well, yeah, you probably did get really great kids, and you're probably a really great mom.
Right.
So, like,
Right.
being able to see, like, how you interact with compliments can really show how much you're able to receive based on your self-love.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think this is something like this is a good piece here. Something that I feel like society really has backwards, and it shows in the way that, we approach life, I think.
Mhm,
And it's this idea that humility is to reject anything good coming your way, to
mhm,
reject those compliments, to reject self-love. Like your self-love has to be conditional, right? If you're a humble
mhm,
person, then your self-love is conditional. And then pride is saying, "Hey, I've got this. I'm awesome. I'm amazing. I totally know my direction. I know like how great of a person I am. I'm a fantastic human." Like that's something I love to say. Like I'm a fantastic human, and
mhm,
people would look at that and say, "Holy crap, prideful," right? But it's not. Like it's flip-flopped. It's
mhm.
totally flip-flopped. The most humbling and the most humble I've ever felt in my life was realizing my glory. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I call it like putting on the God goggles.
Mhm.
When I actually saw myself the way God saw me, it was like, holy cow, that's me.
Yeah.
I'm cool, right? So if that's from God, there's no way they can be anything else but humble. And like I felt a a very reverence with myself
Yeah.
that you just can't deny anymore. And so I feel like one of the things that we really definitely need to talk about when we're asking for forgiveness, number one, forgive yourself completely, utterly, and just realize that a piece of this forgiveness is being willing to not just have your own back, but to totally and completely change the vision
Yeah.
of who you are.
Yeah. And that's scary.
It
Like
is.
that's super scary in order to do, because at least in the clients that I see, like I was coaching someone last night and she was telling me a lot of the things that she doesn't want in a specific relationship. And I said, okay, but what do you want? I said, you just gave me all these examples, things you don't want, but what do you want? And she just kind of sat there. She's like, I don't actually know. And like, it's because
Yeah.
it's so easy for all of us to say all the things we don't want, all the things we don't like about ourselves. It's so much harder to say, well, what do I want?
Yeah.
And being able to really sit with that and really sit with what am I proud about, with myself? Like, what am I proud of myself for doing? Like, and really bask in that glory, like you mentioned. That's hard. That's hard to do.
It is. It is. And especially when, you know, in your subconscious, like I don't think anybody thinks, "Oh, I'm going to go hate myself today." Like I don't think
Totally.
anybody believes that or
Mm-hmm.
thinks that. But your subconscious can either be your best friend or it can be your worst enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I talk about with my clients is clean the basement.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You've got this beautiful home. It's exactly the way you want, but there's a stench coming up from the basement. You got to go down there and you got to figure out what's really there, and it's
Yeah.
terrifying.
Yeah.
It's terrifying. It's dark. There might be a
Mm-hmm.
mummy stuck somewhere in the closet,
Mm-hmm.
or in the corners. But like you saying, because what if comes up? Like, what if I'm not as awesome as what I think I am? What if
Yeah.
I come across prideful? What about all this judgment that someone else might put on me? And I feel like we've also been conditioned to say, well, I don't like that judgment. The judgment doesn't feel good. I don't like other people judging me this way, so I'm just going to agree with them quickly and just, for lack of a better word, go belly up.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's not that's not who we are.
Yeah.
That's not who we're meant to be. You know, we really are meant for a beauty and a greatness, and there's a reason why we're here. And it's
Yeah.
not just to live at a day-to-day basis. I mean, like, how would it really feel, listeners? Like, if you're listening, like, obviously not if you're listening and you are listening in, but like the question I have for my listeners right now is, how would it feel to you to think you are a gorgeous human, that you're one of the best? How would it feel to actually claim that and acknowledge it? And like, you know, I feel like we can bring in Christ here, and if you look in the New Testament, not once did he say he was less than. Matter of fact, he said one greater than Moses is here. One greater than Jonah is here. One greater than Abraham, one greater than Noah, one greater than all of these prophets before, one greater than the temple is here. And I feel like that was a really good message. Like it hit me personally because I was like, how would it feel to acknowledge our own greatness? What would we be asking for then?
And yeah, I love all of that. And as I think about that, it's almost like in order for us to be able to receive help, we always know that we're not able to receive help when we're so concerned about other people's judgments on ourselves. But when we're really understanding our greatness, we are willing to ask for help. Like I think back to in the Garden of Gethsemane, Christ asked his disciples to pray for him. He asked for help. Like
Yeah, he did.
he didn't want to be alone. Like, so if we're going to be willing to follow the example of our Savior, we have to be willing to ask for help when we know that we need it. And that will never come if we're so concerned about what other people are thinking about us, judging us, and all of that. Because all of that is just our own insecurities and our own
Yes.
fears.
Yes. Spot on. Spot on. I feel like this is a really good transition into this next piece, which is I would love to hear from you, like, thinking back about like when you were denying yourself, the experience and the feelings and like really leaning into this to finally like bringing that in and just loving it better, right? Um, what were the things you were asking for? Like, because we do ask for things in the universe, you know. Um, if we look at our results, somewhere between stimulus and results, there's a question that's in there, and kind of like with what your client was doing earlier, how she was saying everything she didn't want. She was literally focusing so much on it that that's kind of what was coming to her, right? So there's somewhere in there that we're asking for something. And I'm not saying like, so let me just be clear to you. Like, I'm not saying that we're asking for trauma and pain and
Yeah.
like for somebody to go and abuse us. I'm not saying that, but like I feel like there are definite things that we ask for um when we're in this state of denial versus the things we ask for in the state of acceptance. What kinds of things did you notice? Like, what was the difference?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think when I was younger, like teenage year, high school years, college years, I was subconsciously asking for I'm trying to think how to word it. It was almost like distrust, meaning I was I was asking, like I was so afraid of people. I was so afraid of being hurt. I was so afraid of trusting someone and them betraying me again. And so anytime I struggled with girlfriends in high school, or I struggled, dating, it was because I was always looking for that evidence on where they were going to betray me. But when I really started to heal, what I started to look for was, who can I trust? And I remember knowing at some point that I would never go on a blind date and marry that person. I just knew that wasn't me. And so it was like I was putting out into the universe that like I needed a friend that I would marry. And so it was really fascinating because I was serving a mission for my church and we were not dating or anything like that. And we were just there doing service in Jesus's name. And that was when I met my husband. And so we were friends years before we ever started dating. And because we had built such a level of trust, as I started healing and as I started like opening up, I was able to find trust and people that I could trust. And that was really unusual for me. So my husband and I, we knew each other for years. We were really good friends. And when we decided to start dating, it was instantaneous. Like the connection was there and it was so wonderful. But then, like going down the road, it was like I still kind of had my guard up. And so I always had to like be asking for people I could trust and like those genuine friendships, those people that weren't going to push me away when I'm not my perfect self, or, when I
Yeah.
think when life gets really messy. And I'm grateful for that because then when like kids started coming and postpartum depression was really bad, and I had a beautiful community around me. And that took a lot of time to build. And that didn't happen overnight. I mean, this is over a span of, 8 years where I was really asking the universe, like, for that trust and being able to be open and receiving of that. Hope that makes sense.
Oh, I love that. I love that because I've noticed within me a similar pattern because um I mine was a little different. As I look back at like my high school girlfriends and stuff like that, there were a lot of them that really, for lack of a better word, stabbed me in the back. You know, they would like ask me who my crush was, and then they'd go and tell that boy like how awful of a person I was and that they needed to stay far away from me. Um, or they would get jealous or something like that. You know what I mean? But today, like my friends that I bring into my sphere are so loyal,
Yeah.
and they're beautiful humans and they've got my
Yeah.
back and we celebrate and we have fun. Um, we laugh like it's just a fantastic, like you said, connection with a friend. And I think like the difference is very similar. Like who can you trust?
Hmm.
It comes back down to who can you trust. Like for me, I was open to everyone,
Hmm.
but that was causing a lot of problems and a lot of pain. But it was because I was so desperate for acceptance.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Totally.
Now I'm not looking for acceptance outside of myself.
Hmm.
It's already there. I already love myself. I already feel like a fantastic human. And so people come into my space that acknowledge that as well. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah. And
And
they're
so,
secure enough to be
yeah,
able to acknowledge it.
yeah, totally. And then like, one of the things that my audience talks about is that idea of security. You know, you've hit that very, very well on the head here because, you know, they're looking for security, obviously in relationships. You want secure relationships. But the one question I really love to ask is how secure do you feel with yourself first? And if that's not there, what is it that you need to obtain? You know, how can you trust yourself? How can you love yourself? How can you bring this in? What kinds of things do you need to, like you said, build this?
Yeah.
You know? So what so we've talked about like how we can open ourselves up to trust, which I think is a beautiful beautiful thing to definitely connect to because that is something that is so needed
Yeah.
from my audience and stuff. What are some other things do you think they need as well to start really really building this internal relationship with themselves? What other things did you have to ask for?
Um, the other one that comes to mind is courage. I had to ask, I had to ask for courage. And that was hard. I will tell you that that for me was probably the hardest of all of them, even more than the trust, like surprisingly. But I still remember I was sitting at my counter and we've moved from this house, but I have such a vivid memory of sitting at my counter, typing into Google therapist near me. And that for me was the most courageous moment I had ever had in my entire life because it was the first time that I was open to someone else helping me because I had finally accepted, I had validated, and then I was ready to, and I had practiced trust, and I knew I could like really have the courage to open up to a total stranger and that somebody outside of me might have the tools that could help me. And that I had never experienced on that level before. And I had to really practice a lot of courage. It was so, so scary. And I had never cried in front of other people. I had I just was a very I still am. I'm a very private person. So to like
Nothing wrong with that.
open up to yeah, to open up to a stranger was like such a foreign concept to me. And I remember telling my husband like I had scheduled an appointment and he was genuinely confused. Not because he wasn't he's I mean he's an amazing man, but because I had done such a great job at hiding what was really happening internally. And that was for me that was like the second step of courage, was like I started showing people what was really happening inside of me. And that was really scary. And so that's probably the other thing I would say, like being able to receive things, is it takes a lot of courage.
Absolutely. See, for me, like I went into therapy because I was desperate. I'd been desperate for such a long time trying to get tools and to get help. And so like I went into therapy and it wasn't that scary to do that. But what was scary and what did take a lot of courage was for me to actually speak up, you know, to actually use my voice. I mean, it's a tool
Yeah.
to create. Actually, it's a creation tool that God has given us to be able to speak, um not just our truth, but also to speak the boundary, to
Yeah.
protect the truth,
Yeah.
you know um to tell someone when they were out of line was
Mhm.
terrifying to me. And to tell someone that they needed to behave better in my space was terrifying for me because I was used to having this great big huge show of emotion and
Mhm.
But I'll tell you something. The people that I thought were my enemies, because of that courage, like you're talking about that courage piece, and I love what you've said there, ended up being some of my greatest supporters and my greatest allies. Because when you're courageous, you become a stable ground.
Yeah.
And instead of like freaking out at me now, people or people do freak out at me. I'm like, have fun with that, right?
Mhm.
Have
Yeah.
fun with that
Yeah.
meltdown, you know?
Totally.
But now, like if they don't agree with me, it can just be a discussion and there's no judgment, there's no anger, there's no hate, there's no rah to it,
Mhm.
which I think is fabulous. So some of
Yeah.
these people that we feel like we have to kick out of our lives that are going to be toxic no matter what. Because I remember thinking that way,
Mhm.
have turned out to be some of my greatest allies and greatest supporters
Yeah.
now.
I think that's such a good point, because it it's almost like courage is the filter for our courage, and holding those boundaries is the filter for the people we want to keep in our lives. And I think about that in terms of like, so here's an example, like with my kids, before my kids go over to a house, so my oldest is 11 and a half, and then I've got a 9-year old, a 5-year old, and then a 4-month old baby. So as my kids have gotten older, I've become increasingly more nervous about them going to homes that I don't know the family really well. I mean, we lived in the same neighborhood for 8 years. I knew these people really well before my kids went into their house, but now they're like playing with friends, and we're in a different neighborhood now, and we've moved. And so I recognized my own anxiety was really high around that. And what I realized was I could just ask questions. I could have the courage to be the one to ask the awkward questions. And so before my kids ever go to someone's house, I have a whole list of questions like, do you have guns in the house? Do you have an open door policy? Are there people with a criminal record in your house? Like, these are the questions. Like, do you have car insurance if my kid's in your car? Like, I asked them all of these very private questions. Where do you store your guns? And it's so fascinating to me, because I'll always, put it out there on, this is from my trauma. This is nothing about you. I ask this to everyone. And
Yeah.
I always put that as like me having courage to just lay it all out there, even though I really don't want to open up about some of like my own trauma or whatever. And then I just like kind of put it out there. And if they freak out, then that's definitely not somewhere that I want my kid to be.
No,
But
I agree.
I will tell you, I have never had anyone freak out. And every parent comes back and says, I am so amazed that you asked these questions. I'm so grateful, and I'm copying them and asking them too. And it's like
Yeah.
it gives us permission. And then those are the people that I end up hanging out with my kids' friends.
Yeah.
Like,
I get it. I
yeah,
get it. And
yeah,
same thing. I've had to do that very same thing with plenty of people. And even like there are people where you're gonna come up with disagreements. Like people don't
Mhm.
have every single viewpoint that you and I do, right? Or even
Mhm.
that I like you and I are probably
Yeah.
disagree in some areas. But I feel like asking those kinds of questions also helps your kids to feel, hey, I can be a bit bold. I can be a little bit,
Mhm.
and I even even my 11-year-old has been really polite and said, "Hey, I don't agree with that, but I really appreciate you sharing something that is important to you."
Mhm.
You know, to a friend's parent, and I was like,
I love that.
I was like, score. So, I mean, this the just to wrap up, I feel like this is a really, really kind of like obvious question, but I feel like it's really important too because I feel like a lot of people, especially if they're stuck in trauma mode, don't feel like they can go out and create the lives that they want to. That they don't feel like they can create that six-figure business. They don't feel like they can create anything but scarcity, you know? And you take a look at like the two things you've talked about, feeling like finding out who you can trust. That's a big piece in like, you know, bringing onboarding clients, and then also figuring out like the courage piece. How has that transferred into what you're building now?
Oh, I think that's everything. Like really. I think about like having to trust myself first and foremost, and validating what my dreams are and what I feel God is calling me to do. That was the first piece. That these weren't childish wishes, that these were like actual things that I am meant to create on this earth, and to give space for that. And then to start finding people I could trust to help me answer that and to build that and to move forward on it. And I will tell you, I have created lifelong friendships based on that kind of filter. Like, who can I trust to help me answer this calling? And then having the courage to go and do it, it doesn't feel good all the time, as you know.
No.
Yeah. Uh,
No.
but being able to practice courage is just a muscle. Like, if you think about courage as a muscle, like, eh, I was able to practice it in my personal life, and being able to speak up for myself, and do these like validate like have all that courage to talk up with other parents. So then all of a sudden it became so much easier when I'm like moving forward in new ways in my personal life and living on purpose. That courage muscle was already starting to get stronger. And it's even stronger at this point because I truly do believe whatever our purpose is and what we feel called to do, that's our compass. That's what God like places in us so that we can move forward. And I believe that the reason why I needed to practice that courage was so that I could answer this calling. And God really placed a lot of things in my path that I needed to practice courage in, so that I could be where I am today. And so,
Right.
yeah, I do believe it's everything.
I do too. I do too. And I feel like we can totally ask for these things. Like, ask for the love to yourself. Ask for trusting yourself so that way you can learn, you know, the characteristics of the people that you really want in your space. Who can I trust? And, also finding like ways to be courageous in the way that you stand up and speak out. And um I feel like these are all so important pieces to forgiveness
Yeah.
in a really big way, because if we think about forgiveness as giving the other person a pass, I mean that goes back into the self-betrayal, right? But forgiveness is not that. It is 100% about giving the things up that do not serve you,
Mm.
and then giving yourself the things that do,
Yeah.
you know? So
Yeah,
I love
I
it.
love that. Yeah, it's such a beautiful thought.
Yeah. Laura, thank you so much for being with us today. And like I said, listeners, I will post a link to her podcast in the description below. So definitely go check out Laura. She's got some fantastic content. I've loved watching her grow and like her cute little family and stuff like that. So go follow Laura as well. And we'll definitely have her back on the podcast again.
Wonderful. Thank you, Erin.
Thanks, Laura. I'll see you guys soon. See you next week. Bye.